Good morning, everyone. We appreciate your patience here. We're doing some technical troubleshooting here on the back end. If at any time you need technical assistance, you can use the chat box. We do have staff monitoring that to offer you assistance. All right, so again, thank you everyone for joining us. Before we begin our formal presentation, we just want to give you a quick sort of WebEx how-to guide. This way we can ensure that we have a smooth meeting moving forward. Now, on the left side of your screen, if you are on the computer, closed captions have been enabled for this meeting. In order to turn those on, you can click that little CC button. If you're on your phone, you're going to need to click the three dots and then click Advanced and select Closed Captions. All attendee videos are going to be off this morning just to limit any distractions. You might also have noticed that you are automatically muted in joining this meeting. But don't worry, because during public comment, you can click the raised hand icon to have a staff member unmute you to speak. On your phone, you're again going to click those three little dots, click raised hand to be unmuted. You can also send us a chat message requesting to speak, and we will unmute you again during public comment. If at any time you need to leave the meeting, you're going to click that big red circle X button on the middle of your menu bar to exit the session. A quick reminder that these meetings are being recorded and that videos are going to be made available online in the coming weeks for review at your convenience if you need to catch up on anything. Again, staff are going to be monitoring the chat box during our meeting today. That button is there at the right. If at any time during the entire event you have a question, again, you can drop that in the chat box and we will do our best to respond to it at the end of the presentation, again, during public comment. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the mic over now to Elaine Chinian, who's going to welcome you to this morning's presentation. Elaine?
Thank you, Paige. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We had part one of these public meetings last night, which went terrific, and we look forward to having a good meeting with you and hearing your comments today. So thank you for joining us. I want to try to acknowledge a number of people who have made this whole endeavor possible. It's been a real collaborative effort, and we've got a lot of agency folks on the line today, all our partners that have been engaged in this process. Just to give you all a sense of who's registering for this, we had something like 50 registrants for this morning's session, including people from universities, authors, the APA Accessibility Advisory Committee, the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, neighboring property owners, press, tourism agencies, regional organizations, artists, and more. So, and thank you to everyone again who has joined us as a participant. This plan is being put forth. The woman that you heard who started us off is Paige Barnum. She is our fearless coordinator in the Parks Agency, which has taken the lead on this plan. Other people on the line today to help us include members of the Bureau of Historic Sites, the Environmental Planning and Stewardship, Regional Operations, Site Operations. I want to make a special thank you to Daniel McKay, the head of our State Historic Preservation Office, who has joined us this morning. I mentioned this is a multi-agency effort. You'll hear more about that as Paige takes us through the presentation. But we are really indebted to the commitment of DEC and the APA for collaborating with us on this UMP, and we thank them. I want to recognize any elected officials or their staff people who may be on the line today. I know we've heard from Assemblyman Matt Simpson, Assemblyman Billy Jones, Senator Dan Steck, and Kathy Hochul's regional representative, Seth Belt. So welcome. I also want to give a shout out to any regional parks commission members that may be on the phone today. I know I've seen some of you join us both last night and today. So thank you for your support and participation. And last but not least, I want to thank our programming partner and friends group, John Brown Lives. We've got Martha Swan and Jeff Jones on the line today with us. So thank you very much for your participation. And one final thanks again to Paige and her sidekick, Madeline Goodman, who's handling all the tech for us. So thank you guys. Take it away.
Great, thank you, Elaine. So let's go to our next slide here, if I can get it to advance. Perfect. All right, so today's agenda, we're first going to hear from Steve Guglielmi from DEC about the unit management plan and the development process for this document. Steve's then going to kick it over to Kevin Prickett, who's with the Adirondack Park Agency, who's going to shed some light on the Adirondack Park State Land Master Plan. I'll take us through the remainder of the presentation, and we're going to wrap up with public comment. So take it away, Steve.
Thank you, Paige. I'm a forester with the Department of Environmental Conservation. I work in the Raybrook office, mostly focused on forest preserve management. The John Brown Farm Historic Site is in Essex County in the town of North Elba. It is a few miles south from the village of Lake Placid. And the map on the left, John Brown Farm is the dark green area. It is surrounded by, in the general area, other state lands that cover the mountains and the general landscape. Those state lands are classified as wilderness or wild forest. John Brown Farm is state-owned land. It's classified as historic. As state-owned land within the Adirondack Park, it is protected by Article 14 of the New York State Constitution. Article 14 states that the lands shall be forever kept as wild forest lands, and the trees shall not be removed. This historic site the land is under custody of Department of Environmental Conservation, but it is managed by the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation through a memorandum of understanding. The map on the right is a closer up view of the site. The lands on the west and north are private property. On the east is the Olympic ski jumping complex. And to the south are state lands, part of the Saranac Lakes Wild Forest. Access to the site is from two roads from the north. The Alsable River flows through the southeast corner of the property, and there's a system of looped trails through the property. Next slide, please. All right, so the purpose of this meeting is to help ensure that we get public involvement as a major component of our unit management plan. So what is a unit management plan, or a UMP? It's a document that sets forth the management objectives for the protection or rehabilitation of the site. It measures the site's resources, making sure that they're consistent with the carrying capacity. It helps the agencies to better meet the needs and interests of visitors and the public. And this unit management plan must comply with the Adirondack Park State Land Master Plan. That document is developed by the Adirondack Park Agency, and it guides long-term management of state lands within the Adirondack Park. Next slide. All right, to start the process of developing this unit management plan, an interagency and interdisciplinary team has been developed. Staff from the Adirondack Park Agency, Department of Environmental Conservation, and Office of Parks, Rec, and Historic Preservation are involved. OPRHP is taking the lead in the development of this unit management plan. Staff involved include those specialized in planning, natural resource stewardship, historic site preservation and interpretation, facilities management. Other specialties may be brought into the team as needed. The on-site manager is part of the team, as is the Friends Group for the site, John Brown Lives. Once the team was in place, we've been conducting an inventory and assessment of the site's cultural, natural, and recreational resources, basically identifying what's on the site and looking at the condition of those resources and determining if they work for the site. Public input is very important in the development of a unit management plan. We need to hear from those who are interested in the site. This meeting is just one of the ways that we'll be gathering public input. But public input at this phase is particularly helpful because it'll help be applied to the next steps as we develop the unit management plan. We'll be looking to identify opportunities of use and recreation on the site, basically what improvements can be made to the site. We'll need to consider the ability of the resource and ecosystem to accommodate any public use. And we'll then create management objectives consistent with the land guidelines we have to follow. Next slide. The unit management plan will address all aspects of the site. This UMP will consider what is working and what can be improved. Does something need to be removed, or does something new need to be created? For this unit management plan, given the historic significance of the site, cultural resources will be the most important consideration in the UMP, how they are protected and how the public experiences them. Stewardship of the resource is something that we always consider in our UMPs to make sure that the site is available for future generations. Recreation use makes up a significant portion of the total use at the John Brown Farm site. We'll need to identify how that is working. Facilities are an important component of the unit management plan, both those used by the public and by the staff for the management and administration of the site. Partnerships have been critical to the current success of the site, and the unit management plan will look to make sure that those continue in the going forward. We'll need to consider the circulation at the site. Basically, what do people experience when they first show up to the site? Do they know where to go? Is it obvious? Does the layout of the facilities contribute or detract from the experience of the historic site? Next slide. With the historic significance of the site, programming can convey an important message to the public. So unit management plan will need to identify possible improvements there or acknowledge the successes currently in place. The sustainability of any of the facilities needs to be considered, both in terms of maintenance in the short term, but also long-term environmental sustainability. It'll be critical to identify barriers that are stopping full access to the site and how those barriers may be addressed. And that's why accessibility is one component of the unit management plan. Staffing is important. It takes a lot to keep the site running. And the unit management plan will identify any potential changes in staffing. The site has a lot of signs on it, interpretive, directional, informational, or regulatory. At spots, is the signage too cluttered or is it lacking? Is the messaging not clear? The UMP will identify potential changes. And the utilities that the facilities use are an important consideration as well. All right, next slide. At the end of the process, we will have a draft unit management plan and potentially a draft environmental impact statement. Once we have the draft ready, we'll need to go through a process to make sure that the 3 agencies involved can sign off and approve that plan. The first step will be to release it for public review. The public review will be for a minimum 30 days. The unit management plan and draft environmental impact statement will be posted online for review. There'll be public meetings where we will explain what we're proposing and then gather comment. That comment period is focused on anything in the unit management plan, proposals that we are included in it, or things that we did not include that the public feels should be included. After that comment period, we will make changes if needed. The unit management plan will then go before the Adirondack Park Agency Board for review. And there will be a second public review period. And this review period will be focused on whether the document we've prepared complies with the guidelines set forth in the Adirondack Park State Land Master Plan. The Adirondack Park Agency then votes to determine if the UMP does comply with the State Land Master Plan, and then it is sent to the commissioners of the Department of Environmental Conservation and Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation for final approval. I will now turn it over to Kevin Prickett. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So, hi, I'm Kevin Prickett. I'm a planner at the New York State Adirondack Park Agency. The Adirondack Park State Land Master Plan guides the planning for state lands within the Adirondack Park. To guide the preservation, management, and use of these lands, the master plan outlines a classification system and guidelines for each classification. Classifications are based on the land's characteristics and capacity to withstand use. The master plan outlines a spectrum of land classifications that range in restrictions. John Brown's farm is classified as historic. Each of the master plan's land classifications includes a definition, like shown here in this slide, providing a general description or broad character of the land's classification to guide planning. As noted in this slide, historic areas are defined as locations of buildings, structures, or sites that are significant in the history, architecture, archaeology, or culture of the Adirondack Park the state, or the nation. John Brown's farm is one of 5 historic areas within the Forest Preserve. Next slide, please. To put into effect or to fulfill the definition of each land classification, guidelines are included to direct management and stewardship. The guidelines set forth allow certain structures, improvements, and uses in some land classifications, and then prohibit certain of them in other land classifications. Basic guideline number 1 for historic area directs planning for historic areas to preserve the quality and character of the historic resources in a setting and on a scale in harmony with the relatively wild and undeveloped character of the Adirondack Park. Unit management plans, like the proposed John Brown Farm UMP, are the opportunity to institute the master plan's broad goals and objectives into specific management actions. All UMPs must conform to the guidelines and criteria set forth in the master plan. Okay, now hand it off.
Great, thank you, Kevin. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do now is I'm gonna give you a quick crash course history lesson about John Brown. So John Brown was born in Torrington, Connecticut in 1800 to a devout Calvinist family. And this family held strong religious convictions, among which was the opposition to human bondage. Now, for most of his life, John Brown would end up being active in the Underground Railroad, assisting freedom seekers and working, we have motion censored lights. We're about sustainability. There we go. So Brown would assist freedom seekers, and he was also actively working in the abolitionist circuit with some prominent leaders you've probably also heard of, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. So in 1848, Brown hears of the efforts of an upstate New York real estate baron, Gerrit Smith, who himself was a dedicated abolitionist as well as philanthropist. Now, over the course of several years, between 1846 and about 1850, Gerrit Smith transfers property ownership of over 120,000 acres of undeveloped Adirondack wilderness to 3,000 free Black New York residents in an effort to circumvent a discriminatory New York state law that was on the books at the time, which required Black men to own $250 worth of property just to vote. Now, shortly after hearing of Smith's efforts, Brown's going to move his own family up to North Elba with the intention of helping these settlers to a new community called Timbuktu. Now, in June of 1855, after a lot of deliberation with Mary Brown, his wife, as well as members of the Timbuktu community, Brown's going to leave North Elba and he's going to follow 5 of his sons west to Kansas, and they are joining the debate over the legality of slavery in the territory. Brown and his sons are going to participate in a series of violent confrontations that are taking place on the frontier between pro and anti-slavery forces as the Kansas Territory is moving towards statehood. Now, 4 years later, Brown will lead 21 men in an armed raid on the U.S. arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. This is done in an effort to initiate a revolt of enslaved persons. After several days of fighting, John Brown is injured and then captured. He's later found guilty by a grand jury of murder, treason, as well as conspiring with enslaved peoples to rebel. Brown is sentenced to death and hanged in West Virginia on December 2nd, 1859, and he actually becomes the first person in American history to be executed for treason. Now, as Brown wished, his body is returned to North Elba and it's buried at the farm. Mary and their surviving children are actually going to remain at the homestead until about 1863, and 3 years later, Mary is going to sell the family farm. So now in 1870, the property is actually purchased by a group of private citizens who are dedicated to preserving it in John Brown's memory. In 1896, this group, known as the John Brown Association, is going to gift the property to the state of New York, and this is conditional that it be used for the purpose of a public park or reservation forever. So here on your screen, actually, that image at the right, you can see the granite donors monument that is inscribed with the names of those forward-thinking citizens from the John Brown Association. Then on July 21st, 1896, hundreds of people attend the official historic site dedication ceremony. That's the image there on your screen at center. Now today, more than 125 years after the site was established as an official New York State Historic Site, thousands visit these public lands annually. Now, of course, it is no surprise, and it's befitting that John Brown's farm is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The register is part of the National Park Service's program to support efforts to identify, evaluate, and protect cultural resources across the country. Now, whereas the site is significant not only, of course, in local and regional history, but our nation's history, it is also designated as a National Historic Landmark. Just last year, the site was added to the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. This is a federal program that works in collaboration with local and state entities to create a national community of sites that have a connection. Lights are really finicky today. So it creates a national community of sites that have a connection to the history of resistance to enslavement. So this brings us to our present day and a return to our conversation about the current planning effort. So last fall, a majority of the core team, that group that Steve outlined for you just a bit ago, assembled on site and we began discussions about our planning process for John Brown Farm. Since then, our group has begun to meet monthly and we host internal meetings, and we've also started forming smaller working groups. These working groups are going to be really crucial to identifying management alternatives and the potential actions we'll take at the site. The structure of our planning team really guarantees that we have site-specific, regional, community, and statewide viewpoints present at the discussion table to make sure we're doing a really comprehensive look at this site. Now, there actually have been a few previous planning efforts at the historic site. In 1978, in the lead up to the 1980 Winter Olympics, there was a redevelopment plan for the site. It was prepared in hopes of better accommodating the flood of patrons that were expected to come up to Lake Placid during the Winter Games, and those individuals that even after the games would seek out the ski towers. Proposals from this plan, however, were never implemented. So in 1988, the site's superintendent prepared a document he called the Site Assessment and Analysis Report. This document was to be used in the future preparation of a master plan, and while no future master plan has yet been written, this document is really valuable to us today as we undertake the UMP process. So little has actually changed on the physical landscape of John Brown Farm since 1977. That's the date this black and white photo in the background was taken. However, the management and operational context for John Brown Farm has changed. Just one example is how today the site welcomes nearly double the number of visitors that it did in 1977. So being now that we are decades removed from that last planning effort, it's important we bring together, historians and conservationists, accessibility and social justice advocates, as well as, community stakeholders like yourselves, so that we can identify how the site is currently serving the public, how we can better meet your needs and expectations moving forward, and how we can ensure that the area remains consistent with the wild forest that surrounds the site. So now we're going to do a quick inventory of the site's historic, natural, and recreational resources, as well as some of the built facilities that are on the site, because obviously the unit management plan and the proposed actions in it are going to have a bearing on the site for decades to come. So as Kevin previously mentioned, the UMP guidelines for historic areas must principally work to preserve the quality and character of the site's historic and cultural resources. Those physical and spiritual reminders in history like archaeology and buildings and landscapes that are worthy of protection, interpretation, and celebration. Now, since John Brown Farm became a historic site, we've had state agencies, consultants, as well as academic institutions undertake archaeological investigations at the site. The image you see here on your screen at left of the young student is actually from a SUNY Potsdam Field School program, where students excavated around the farmhouse as well as its barn to research Timbuktu. Archaeology is, of course, also a critical component of environmental review at the site and is necessary in the preparation for utility work like septic or electric. Now, of course, John Brown's story and that of his family and his abolitionist collaborators is also told in the historic site's buildings and that memorial landscape, that special place that many of us probably go to reflect. In total, there are 10 structures on the site that are considered contributing resources to the National Register and National Landmark designation that we talked about earlier. Just some of these contributing resources, the ones you see here on your screen are the farmhouse, the barn, and the family cemetery. Now, much of John Brown's homestead was actually open for pasture and cultivation when his family was in residence. Today, however, most of that land has been reclaimed by wild forest and is suitable habitat for the number of animal species that are common to the Adirondacks. While there are no significant natural communities at the site and there aren't any rare or endangered species documented, there are still thoughtful stewardship actions that are being taken at the site. Just one of the examples we can offer you is that the site supports a pollinator garden, and one of the species of plant in that garden is milkweed. This native plant species is critically important to monarch butterfly populations, for example. As far as recreational resources at the site go, the site has passive recreational opportunities that are popular with visitors and residents year-round. There are about 4 miles of multi-use trails on the site, and this trail network, as well as the relatively level grounds that the site has, support a number of activities such as walking, photography, birding. In the winter, if you've been there, you've probably seen some folks snowshoeing or cross-country skiing. Now, at John Brown Farm, there's of course tremendous opportunity to continue interpretive and educational programs, as well as an opportunity to think about expanding them. It's of paramount importance here that our interpretive and educational work not only has relevance to today's social context, but that our events are engaging to audiences of all ages and that they are, again, accessible to everyone. We're really lucky to have a robust partnership with John Brown Lives. And so it's through regular collaboration with them, as well as other partners, that our site is able to host a variety of events and special programs year-round. This slide here, you can see just some of the programs that took place at John Brown Farm the past calendar year. We have events that commemorate the life of John Brown, talks that bring awareness to the wildlife species that call the Adirondacks home, cultural performances, art installations that bring attention to, ongoing social justices. It's a really special place in that there's a wide variety of valuable interpretive programs that we can offer. Now, of course, adequate facilities are also important to supporting our work. These facilities must, ensure that we can safely and comfortably welcome people, visitors to our site, and these facilities must also be appropriate work environments so our staff are able to provide care for the important resources we have here. Our UMP process is going to help us as a core team better analyze our existing facilities and identify administrative needs so that when we're writing the UMP, we are able to develop a proactive, effective management strategy here. As visitors to the historic site, many of you have actually probably visited that ground floor of the barn. That's the image there at the top left of your screen. Perhaps you've read exhibits there, or maybe you've availed yourself of the site's only publicly accessible indoor bathroom facility that's in the barn. This space comfortably seats about 30 people for a program, which is why you often see programming outside under a tent, that image there below the barn. The caretaker's cottage, that image of the 2-story structure in the top right of your screen, is not only the site manager's residence year-round, but it's also a cramped office space that's shared among 3 staff members, and this office space isn't code compliant. 3 unheated garages behind the cottage serve as maintenance facilities and equipment storage for the site. It's also important to note here that through this planning process, our team is evaluating accessibility and physical design site-wide. This way we can ensure that staff as well as patrons are able to access facilities and able to comfortably enjoy our programming and activities we offer there. So next steps, where are we going after today's meeting? I think is probably a big question on your mind. So after the public comment period ends, and again, that's on March 13th, we're going to take all the substantive suggestions, issues, concerns that you've brought up at this meeting and through any mail we receive, summarize all of that input and share it back with you. In a month or so, we actually plan to release our visitor survey. This is going to be another opportunity to where you can share your views, experiences, your hopes and dreams for John Brown Farm. In the fall, our team's going to continue to work closely with colleagues and other affiliation groups so that we can coordinate additional public engagement opportunities and really speak to, the concerns or interests and priorities we're hearing from everyone. On this slide, you may have noticed there's some brighter green text, and that's just to quickly draw your eye to the number of future opportunities there are to contribute public thought and input on the UMP's development. In early winter of next year, our team's going to work continually to identify issues that will potentially be addressed in the draft environmental impact statement. And we anticipate early drafts of the UMP to be published next spring or summer 2024. And it's our hope that our final UMP will be released in winter of 2025. So I'm sure this is the part of the event you've all been looking forward to. We are at public comment. It's our time to hear from you, and we want to know, most importantly, what issues are at the forefront of your minds as they relate to management or programming at John Brown Farm. I do want to give a few ground rules before we get started here with public comment. Just the first thing to note is that this time isn't really intended to be a discussion back and forth between the planning team and the public. It's rather an opportunity for us to sit and listen and hear what's most important to you as we move forward. These early meetings are really critical for our team so that we can better understand where you're coming from as we start to discuss priorities and actions here. Of course, we are happy to answer any questions you may have about the site, its resources, or just the UMP planning process in general. If you would like to speak this morning, you can request to do so in a couple of ways. You can request to be unmuted in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, click that little hand icon again. When you are called upon, we do ask that you introduce yourself, and if you are affiliated with an organization or organizations, to share with us that information at the time. One last note, we do ask that you be cognizant of your speaking time and conscientious of that. We're hoping that folks will speak to about 2 minutes. This way we can ensure that we hear from everyone on this call. Of course, some of you might have input that is more than 2 minutes, so we want you to share that with us in either an email. It'll be the same email address that you registered for this event using, or you can, of course, postmark us a letter. Our contact information, I believe Madeline is going to share in the chat box, but it is also available on the slide I will pull up once we open the floor for public comment, which is right now. So bear with me while I flick my screens and look to see if we have any raised hands that I can call upon. Okay, I know that I see hands raised. There we go. All right, I see Brian Wood. So Brian, I am going to unmute you. Brian, your mic should be live.
Hi,
Yep.
Brian Woods. I'm here as a private citizen, longtime visitor, new-time resident, and visited the farm. I do visit the farm quite often for various purposes, for programming, for walks, and I'm just curious with the plan. I read through the meeting packet and I followed along everything. Can you detail how the current plan, what changes are being made? Because I've seen what the information is, but I'm wondering, are there any kind of planned departures from what has occurred in the past? What is new? Just so we can kind of know what changes are planned to occur. That would just be helpful for me to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, if I understand your question correctly, Brian, so there isn't any current official planning document that guides this site. So really sort of everything you see at the site right now is up for consideration and negotiation. As Steve mentioned, we want to evaluate what's working here. Like, is the sense of arrival, does it make sense? Do we need to reroute some trails out of some, areas that are susceptible to flooding? It's really a sort of a blank slate outside of the fact that there are existing conditions. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's perfect. I wasn't sure if there was an existing UMP or planning document that this would deviate from. So knowing that it is a blank slate, that's really helpful for any potential feedback that we might have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. All right, I see Amy Robinson. Amy? Your mic is live. I can't hear you, but
Is that me?
Yep, there you go. Hi,
Okay,
Amy.
I lost the audio for a second while I was being unmuted. Okay, my name's Amy Robinson, and I'm working with John Brown Lives on hands-on history, which is designed around creating on-site curriculum and also pre-visit and post-visit for field trips to the farm. So for me, I think a big priority is accessibility for groups of students and, potentially them having a way to eat lunch on site, um, and just being able to kind of like move large, potentially somewhat large groups through the site. So just looking, and of course, that would raise accessibility questions for students who have, accessibility needs, things like that. So that's my contribution for now.
Paige, you are muted.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. Rin, your mic is live.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. As an artist who's had the immense privilege of working at John Brown Farm through John Brown Lives, I feel that the opportunity for artists to work on site and have a location where artists can exhibit brings such contemporary resonance to John Brown's purpose in life. And I'd love to see the unit management plan consider more opportunity for that.
Thank you, Rin. All right, next up in my list, I see Connor Williams. Connor, you are unmuted.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, hi, Connor.
Great. Hi. Thank you so much for everything you're doing in service of this incredible cultural resource. I'm a historian and I work at Yale in the departments of African American Studies and History. I'm a 19th century American historian and African American Studies historian. I also, for the last 2 years, was able to work for the Naming Commission, which was the body created by Congress to study its Civil War commemoration in the Defense Department and rename Confederate assets, and I was their lead historian for. So this matters a lot to me. I'm also a John Brown Lives member, and I also spent a lot of my time in nearby Westport. And so I think my comment is I was able to visit the farm over the winter, and I think it does so many things well. As a historian, whenever the first thing people want to ask me about John Brown is something like, was he right or was he crazy? And I always say that really depends on moral judgments that you need to make about the role of violence in society and what revolutionary violence looks like. But I think one thing that people don't get enough, and this is speaking as a 19th century historian, is a sense of the world John Brown lived in. And I say that we have this sense kind of that the United States in the 1850s was torn between abolitionists and pro-slavery, and it was like a 50-50 thing. And history is very, very clear on this. It was not. The States in the 1850s, excuse me, was a slave society. It was one of the 5 great slave societies of world history. 12 of its first 15 presidents had been highly slavery. 2/3 of all Supreme Court justices have been pro-slavery. I think most importantly for John Brown is the sense that in 1857, the Dred Scott decision legalizes slavery throughout the United States for all time and says that the black has no rights and the white man is bound to respect. And that is the Supreme Court endorsed law of the land. And so I really do believe that it's not my place to say whether John Brown was right or wrong, whether he was crazy or not. But I think it's really important for any visitor to the farm to get this sense, it's not really talked about in books, of just truly how pro-slavery the country was and truly how pro-slavery the country was becoming. And of course, John Brown acts not knowing there's going to be a civil war in 2 years or that invasion is going to happen. So I guess I'll try to, I think I'm at 2 minutes or so, but thank you for your patience. What I'm trying to recommend and would love to help with is that ever any way to do so is to get some interpretation up there that's very forward facing, that's right when somebody gets to the park, however you could do that appropriately for the code, that really makes them realize this is the foreign country of the past that John Brown was living in, slave society, and that's what he was reacting to. Pass the mic, but welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor. I appreciate that perspective. All right, next I'm going to unmute the mic of James McKenna. So, all right, James, your mic should be hot.
Thank you. My name's Jim McKenna, or James, I guess. I'm with an organization or a foundation called the E-Line Foundation, which owns approximately 1,500 acres, I guess, to the west of the farm, the John Brown farm, and we have a right-of-way to on the trail system to the farm. I guess my question is, we're just going through, we've just about completed on our property an archaeological and historical investigation that Harjan has done, and you know, there's a lot of tie-ins with Timbuktu on our properties, and also John Brown specifically. On one farm that we identify as the E-Line farm, which is closest to the John Brown farm, in the Lyman Epps' second farmhouse was located on that property. And then a little further west on our Heaven Hill farm property, going back, well, John Brown's son, I forget his name right off the top of my head, married the original Heaven Hill farm owner's daughter in the building, which kept that son from going off to Harper's Ferry. And then even after that time period, one of the owners called Anna Newman. It's some of our historical research says that she had a lot of tie-in with some of the original Timbuktu, I guess, members that, you know, for hired them or what. But my question really surrounds is, I know it's the UMP's for specifically the farm property, but our lands are also public lands as well. And we do see, as time goes on, we helping develop and cultivate the story of Timbuktu, John Brown, and the connections to our properties. And the question is, how can you tie that in with this UMP? I don't know if I made myself very clear, but that's my question.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jim. Jim/James. I know one of the things that you know, was mentioned in one of the slides earlier is partnerships are a really inextricable thing in the UMP and how we, you know, perceive of the work we do at state parks. And so I think it is like having those conversations and having, you know, focused meetings to talk about building this relationship further and acknowledging the interconnections that this site and the John Brown story has with Timbuktu, other families in the area. I don't know if anyone else from our agency or DEC or APA wants to expand on that, but definitely feel free to turn on your mic and do so.
Hey, it's Elaine Chinian. I am grateful for the chance to hear this, and while the UMP must focus specifically on state property, and we have our work to do on many of sort of the internal to the farm issues, I think you bring up a great point, Jim. And you know, as this process proceeds, I think it's worth having a special meeting with you to delve into the possibilities. That's part of the process, is that we can meet with separate stakeholders, and I would consider you one of them.
Great, thank you.
All right, next I'm going to go to Maggie Newell. Maggie, your mic should be on.
I'm Maggie Newell. I work for the Adirondack Mountain Club doing education and outreach. And I love John Brown Farm. It's a favorite spot for me to bring folks visiting in town, because it's a lesser known story of the Adirondacks. So I love your educators and the interpretive opportunities there, and would love to see more of that going forward, and especially with that school audience. I think this is a story that folks who live here don't always encounter. So having integration with your educators and our school systems, I think, would be a wonderful thing to work towards. I also especially love the Dreaming of Timbuktu exhibit and would love to see some permanence, some more permanent exhibits in that, or something that folks can engage with even when those barn doors are closed. So expanding kind of the Timbuktu focused educational materials, I think, would be wonderful. I also kind of visiting John Brown Farm sometimes for recreation, sometimes for these educational opportunities. I feel like they're two very separate experiences. So I would love for there to be some of those interpretive materials that even as you head out on the trail, or if you're looking to go for a ski, you still encounter some signage and other things that connects these two different experiences folks are looking for as visitors. Yeah, so those are my big thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. It's always exciting to see when people access the site, both, the historic elements and the recreational ones. So thank you for that. Next, I see Paul M. Paul M., your mic should be live. Yep. Hi, Paul.
Hi, my name's Paul Miller. I had the distinct privilege of directing a documentary called Searching for Timbuktu, and was filmed there at the John Brown Farm. So I'm eternally grateful for that opportunity. I just want to reiterate what's already been said about some of the interpretive materials. And I think that, selfishly, it would be great to have a more robust digital offering there at the site so that you could, like the previous speaker just mentioned, engage with the site even when the barn doors are closed. Like, you may be able to watch digital content inside, but you might consider the opportunities like augmented reality, where people can use their devices to engage with the site in a more kind of modern way. There are other opportunities that you could do there, but I've screened the documentary probably 24 times at various places across the state, and people were always, they always say the same things. When I go there, I didn't know that this is what the story was. And so, having people understand the story while they're there and not later is, I think, as an opportunity. That's it.
Thank you, Paul. I actually went to a screening at SUNY Albany's downtown campus, so thank you for sharing that. Next, I see Elizabeth Lee. Elizabeth, your mic should be live.
Hi. This is Elizabeth Lee. I am the Executive Director at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Essex County. And I have a comment and a question. My question is whether there are archives from the John Brown family, and specifically in relationship to the farm history of the Timbuktu residents, or I feel like that, not as a distraction to the slavery and abolition themes, but to expand the interpretation potential. And particularly, I think that our educators would very much like to talk about what were the barriers to new farmers at that time, which may still have some continuity to barriers to new farmers today. And the other comment that I wanted to make was that I don't want to assume from what you have said or not said today that the people who use that land and site prior to John Brown's arrival are included in the planning process. And I would just encourage you to reach out to either the Six Nations Cultural Center or the Akwesasne Cultural Center to make sure that their voice is part of this planning process. And you may have already done that, but that's important to invite them into the process. And if we can help in some way, because you are in Essex County, we would like to be involved in programming around the period of the time when the farm was a farm.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So we'll tackle your first question. Yeah, Brendan. Yep.
Yeah, this is Brendan Mills, the site manager. Yes, we do have plans in the works for a display on the Native Americans that would have been here. If you'd like to contact my office, please do. All right. We'd love to hear from you.
Great, thank you.
Brendan, would you also comment on collections? I believe that was one of the early components of Elizabeth's comment.
A lot of the collection, a lot of Brown letters, artifacts, that sort of thing is at Harpersbury and the West Virginia State Archives. We do have some letters here from the Hicks collection and some archival materials, but not a lot from the Timbuktu era, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
All right, Brendan, I also, since you're on, there is a question in our chat that we received, and I'm going to kick it over to you. The question or comment was, on an earlier slide, you showed a newspaper article indicating there was public protest over previous plans to modify the historic site. Can you summarize what the objections were to?
Well, I was in junior high at the time, but apparently there were some objections, especially from a local historian, about a visitor center being built at the entrance of the site. And I believe there was some dissension in the local press and I think the New York Times, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And I believe that's probably what kept the visitor center from being constructed.
Thanks, Brendan.
Sure.
So another question we have that I might direct towards Steve or Kevin. The question is the multi-use designation for the trails a technical term? Are there any activities not included in that designation?
Yes, the trails on John Brown Farm are not open for motorized access, so no snowmobiles, no dirt bikes or ATVs, something like that. It's the non-motorized foot access, mostly snowshoeing, skiing, walking, dog walking, those sorts of activities.
Thanks, Steve. All right, I'm going to go back to some raised hands. I see Ellen Bettman. Ellen, your mic should be live.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ellen Bettman. I've been a part of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative since its inception. I serve on its advisory board. I think that the area, the John Brown's farm historic site is a perfect place for both students, young people, and adults to engage with issues that are so divisive right now in our country. Specifically regarding whose history should be taught and in what way. I concur and want to echo what Elizabeth Lee said about involving Six Nations. And I would add to that programs that incorporate educators at the Wild Center would be wonderful. There have been some, and it would be great to see them continue with John Brown Lives. I've been a part of some of those groups with the Wild Center and John Brown Lives, and it was a really just wonderful moment of people of all ages. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing what happens as the process goes forward.
Thanks, Ellen. So in our chat, we also have a comment from Ellen Crayley. Can we consider ways of developing the John Brown site in relationship to or in connection with other historic sites in the state? For example, the Garrett Smith Estate, the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum, the Women's Rights National Historic Park. Thanks. Would any of our other staff like to answer this question? I think Elaine touched on partnerships a bit earlier, but.
I would just, I think it's great that we're hearing a lot from people who are willing to help, which is great. And I was just sort of formulating an idea that we would follow this up by really, sending a letter to so many people. Last night we heard about potential partner engagement with other organizations, and today we're hearing that more. Definitely want to ensure that we're being really sensitive and robust in our outreach to all communities of interest. And but you know, the idea of collaborating, we're big collaborators here. We're trying to be as open and inclusive at this site as in all sites. So you know, yes, if other groups, like you mentioned, Ellen, are interested in both just commenting on this plan or suggesting ways in which we could engage with them, we are very open to that and appreciate your comment.
Paige, can I chime in a bit?
Absolutely, Martha.
Hi, everybody. Martha Swan. I'm the director of John Brown Lives. There's so many wonderful comments today and questions and ideas stirring around. It's really exciting. I did want to just weigh in on I guess, two things at the moment. One is that John Brown Lives is a member of the Underground Railroad Consortium of New York State, and we're not as active as I would like us to be just because of capacity, but certainly with the folks at the Garrett Smith in Peterborough, New York, we have a 20+ year relationship with them. And of the consortium, we're very involved right now, and have been for the last couple of years, with the North Star Underground Railroad Museum up in the Keysville area. So that's one. We're also developing relationships with some of the John Brown related sites in different parts of the country, like Connecticut, Oberlin, Ohio, etc. And to Paul Miller's excellent suggestion about using augmented reality to help bring the story forward, particularly of Timbuktu, when the site is open and when the barn doors are closed, we are thinking along those lines and have a letter of intent or a letter of desire for funding into the National Historic Preservation Trust, I guess is what it's called, to help us develop an augmented reality program, particularly to help elaborate and engage people in the Timbuktu story. So we're working on all these fronts, and the help and funding and all those wonderful things are appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you, Martha. So another comment panelists have received in the chat. Question is there any plan to redo the signage near the gravesite so that the Black men are not listed last on each list, and perhaps not with a qualifier after their names about their ethnicity when others are not identified by their ethnicity? So one thing,
Paige?
Yep.
Yeah, I believe they're talking about the monument, the plaque on as you go in on the left-hand side, and it's actually in a book called Lies Across America. The author, James Lowen, didn't like the idea of it, you know, as it was just said, that it was a each African American is listed last, and the word Negro is after their name. He felt it was a sort of segregation that Brown would not have approved of. He's correct. Brown did believe in equality between the races. You have to understand the context of that monument in 1915 when it was put up. It was probably put up by a company that made monuments for like battlefields, like Gettysburg or Little Bighorn. And the members of Brown's raiding party, well, they were considered soldiers in this fight for freedom. So on any kind of monument on a battlefield like Gettysburg or so forth, you're put in order of rank. So lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, private. If you're the same rank, it goes by dates of service, whoever joined the Army first. And that's one of the reasons why they're last. The African American members mostly joined up after the other members of Brown's raiding party. The other thing is they were offered officer commissions, but they turned them down because they would be part of Brown's civilian army, that a civilian government, I should say, this government exile that he hoped to organize as he conducted his slave rebellion throughout the South. So they didn't want to be generals and senators at the same time. The other thing is, in 1915, the word Negro was respectful word for African Americans, and those who commissioned the plaque, which they were relatives of the Browns by marriage, they probably felt the need to show that African Americans had fought for their freedom. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Brendan. And one other general comment that I think is important to note too is that I know our agency, I work for New York State Parks. Our agency in the past year has recently completed a diversity, equity, inclusion, and access plan, a DEIA plan. And one of the key objectives and strategies we have in that plan is reviewing signage and exhibits in our parks for language and sensitivity. So I think it's important to recognize too that part of this unit management plan process and integrating all the work that we do as an agency for diversity issues, and the same goes with APA and DEC, is being attuned to how language changes over time and making sure that materials are sensitive and attuned to the cultural context that we do live in today.
Paige, it's Jeff. Can I weigh in on this for a second?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Jeff Jones with John Brown Lives. So there are, last night we had a long discussion about controversies related to the John Brown statue. And today we're talking about the listing at the graves. And it's important, I think, that we understand the historic moment in which these different things were created. And that will be part of the ongoing conversation. One of the conversations that we've had through our John Brown Day events is the discovery of the what we call the Five for Freedom, which are the 5 Black men who rode with John Brown into Harper's Ferry. That's an incredible story. Brendan was just talking about John Brown's long-range strategy for a new government in the South. I mean, this is incredible history that people don't know. And so I'm just looking forward to that being a part of what's going on going forward. The 5 for Freedom each had an incredible, had their own story to tell. And one, Osborne Perry Anderson, actually survived the raid on Harper's Ferry and was at John Brown's farm on July 4th, 1860, and was protected against raiders from Virginia coming to try to capture him. So, I mean, the history is just amazing, and it needs to be told, it needs to be known. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. So I see some folks that I know have had an opportunity to speak before still have their hand raised. So if you just have inadvertently left your hand up, take that down would be great. Excellent. I do want to note, though, that in the chat, panelists have received a message from Rin Seward expressing an interest in an art program or artist residency to the site to bring unique viewpoints to the farm through arts and cultures. Another comment in the same is the proliferation of signs that are dotting the viewshed at the farm is also of concern. Rin, I will unmute your mic if you want to supplement that, since I see your hand is still raised. Your mic's live, Rin.
Hi. Yeah, I'm sure that in all sorts of parties will be involved once the management plan is complete, including industrial designers, exhibit designers, and everything else. And I just am happy to be one of those voices.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Madeline, can you confirm for me that I have not missed any comments in the chat?
I also want to thank, this is Elaine again, just thanking, I'm seeing a note from Connor Williams offering support from Yale's Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition. I want to thank him for that.
All right, I think we've covered all of these substantive comments to be shared. Yes, all comments have been addressed. Great. So one thing before we close out today's session is that once we, officially sign off of this meeting, you are going to be taken to a final landing page where you are able to not only sign up to be added to our mailing list. We do have many of your email addresses from this registration event, but we want to just doubly ensure that we are staying in communication with you since you've shared your thoughts with us and spent time with us this morning. It's very helpful, and we really appreciate you taking your time to do so when you might have work or child needs, whatever it may be. So thank you again for joining us. Madeline is posting some links that might be helpful for you in the next couple of days. One is the public information packet that was provided as part of this meeting. We also, again, since these sessions are being recorded, the recordings are hopefully going to be up in the next couple of days, and she shared with you that URL. We can also send out an email to all the registrants letting them know when those recordings are available. So thank you again, everyone. I don't know if Elaine or anyone else wants to close out, but we really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.